Thank you for joining the Education Writers Association today for this webinar, how COVID-19, climate change, and other crises are changing science instruction. I'm Eric Roblin, the Deputy Director at EWA. Before we begin, let me go over some housekeeping items. It'll just take a moment. If you have a question for our speakers, you can type it into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Please include your name and affiliation. You can submit a question at any time during the webinar. We'll get to as many as we can during the Q&A portion after initial presentations and some questions from our moderator. Also keep an eye on the chat box today. Actually, never mind. We sometimes do that where we share information in the chat box, but we may not be doing that. But that's where, again, you can post questions in the question box. As soon as the webinar closes, you will see an evaluation survey. Please complete it. Your feedback is really important to us and helps us improve. So I am thrilled to introduce our moderator today, Liana Loewus, an assistant managing editor at Education Week. We used to be colleagues at Education Week many years ago. She did some great reporting and she's been editing for a number of years now. So really pleased to have her today. And our webinar, as I think you know, will explain how current events are reinvigorating the teaching of science and how educators are leveraging phenomena like climate change and COVID-19 to answer pressing questions that students have and that lots of people have. Along the way, these efforts in schools are seeking to engage young people in deeper learning in science. So Liana now is going to introduce our distinguished speakers today. I'm going to hand the mic to you, Liana.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks to EWA for hosting us. Hello, everyone. As Eric said, we're here to talk about some of the ways that science educators are getting students excited about science learning, in particular by using current events such as climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic as the basis for their lessons. And as Eric mentioned, I'm Liana Loewus, an assistant managing editor at Education Week, and I'll be moderating today. We have three amazing guests today. So I'll go ahead and introduce them. Okhee Lee is a professor of childhood education at New York University. Shiela Lee, not related, is a pre-K 5 STEM teacher at PS 59 Beekman Hill International School in New York. And Tricia Shelton is the Chief Learning Officer for the National Science Teaching Association. They're going to go ahead and they're each going to talk for a few minutes, and then we'll go into a Q&A. And then at the end, you all will have a chance to ask your questions as well. So Trish, I believe you're going to kick things off.
I am. Thank you so much and welcome everyone. I'm really super excited to be here and to be part of this panel. And I wanted to start off with a little walk down memory lane, so to speak. And you see here this slide in front of you. It shows that in 2012, the framework, what we call the framework, was released that provided an evidence-based foundation for new standards, drawing on research on how kids learn science effectively. The documents featured on the left-hand side of the screen, the framework and the standards. And in this case, I'm showcasing the next generation science standards, the national standards, but also we can think about state standards in the same way. These documents together identify the science and the practice of science that all kids in kindergarten through 12th grade should know and be able to do by the end of their formal education career. They together make up what we call a new vision for science education. And this new vision was different at its inception because it prioritized equity and diversity at the center, focusing on providing all students access to science literacy. You'll see there on the map as we move across that we have reached really close to what I consider to be critical mass. 45 states plus DC have adopted or adapted the framework or the NGSS, and 3 others are about to follow, including Texas. Throughout the United States, the complicated work of implementing new standards with big instructional shifts and how science should be taught and learned is underway, represented by the right-hand side of this slide. And if you could please click, the takeaway here is that science has had a lot of power in education because of the intersection and synergy amongst research, policy, and practice. And the practice piece I'm here representing today from the National Science Teaching Association. Next slide, please. So now that we've wrapped up our situated example of the standards within this topic, I'd like to surface that teachers need support to understand and implement new standards and a new vision that begins with the needs of learners. If you could please click. Let's consider how most of us have experienced school, that is represented by the left-hand side of this slide that you see. And that's the way I know that I experienced school. Teachers were tasked with disseminating knowledge to students. The teachers were the knower in the classroom, and kids were focused on learning about science, often as a fixed compilation of facts that were gathered by scientists, and they were to be memorized by students. Some students were able to learn science and even get excited about science with this traditional approach. But the new vision has flipped this instructional approach on its head. Instead of teachers passing knowledge down to students, students are building understanding of science ideas and concepts by working to figure out phenomena in the world or by designing solutions to problems. This approach capitalizes on the curiosity and the lived experience that students bring to the learning and positions them in science, that science is something that they can use in their world by them, something that is used in their world by them. This phenomena-based approach brings all students to the table and positions students as the knowers who do the work with teachers to understand the science in their world. And if we click again, we see I have the teachers there repositioned, and I placed barbells around the teachers there, because this has been a really big lift for teachers. They're the ones that are providing that guidance, that guide on the side approach that positions students to do the heavy lifting of figuring out, mirroring that work that scientists and engineers do. But teachers have come to us in droves saying that this is a heavy lift and they need a support, especially when it comes to professional learning and materials like lessons. Next slide, please. So at NSTA, we have answered this call for support. We're designing resources that incorporate learning experiences that grow out of the lives of students and teachers and that leverage real-world phenomena. The pandemic and the focus on science has brought many more teachers to this table that are those teachers looking for resources that not only provide support for teaching within the new vision, but also for lessons that give students agency and understanding and offering solutions to problems that impact society. And that we'd like to highlight some of those today. I'm going to start here with the Kiss the Ground initiative. We partnered with Kiss the Ground to, we developed lesson plans around their documentary film and related resources that discuss regenerative agriculture and provide students opportunity to use data from multiple sources, including the data they collect themselves, to develop explanations on how saving the soil can have far-reaching positive impacts on Earth's environments. This research is a new frontier, providing new ideas and generating evidence about how we can reduce the impact of climate change. And through these lessons, students can join scientists in exploring solutions to this societally pressing problem. And they also empower students that they can be a part of the solution through that understanding of science, and also one that calls them to take action. Next slide, please. And then my second example you see here is an initiative that we call Our Beautiful Planet. This showcases climate science research through a series of 5 to 7 minute long short films that are paired with high quality lesson plans. Designing lessons that feature phenomena like climate change and COVID-19, they enable teachers to support their curriculum that is often determined by their district with these relevant and engaging phenomena, so they can build them in and provide these opportunities, even if their school, their district, or their state has said these are the things that you need to teach. So let's consider some outcomes, wrapping my portion up by making these shifts and implementing them in the classroom. When students feel respected, valued, and important within the classroom community, they are more engaged, they develop a deeper understanding of science, and they become part of the solution for real-world problems. Students are active participants in their own discovery process, and when we use phenomena like climate change and COVID-19, we are also providing students opportunities to have agency and impact on their world now and in the future. And so with that, I'm excited to pass it to my colleague, Shiela, to talk a little bit more about her use of these types of phenomena in her classroom.
Thank you so much, Trish. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go over a unit I did with my 2nd to 4th grade students last year when we were actually remote. And you can see here on the screen, this is now on the NSTA website. So if you want more information, you can just go to this link. Next slide. So right here, engineering is part of the science standards. And in my problem-based engineering design unit, students were asked to think of problems, local or global, that they were interested in building a prototype to help solve. Now, students move through phases in each of the circles to help them understand the engineering design process. You can see here, we started first with the Ask and Research yellow bubble, where it says, what is the problem? Students brainstorm problems, and they thought about what are possible solutions. Then they designed, drew, and made a prototype. And then they got feedback from their peers to improve and refine. And during this process, they would also go back and to the other circles in case they needed to rethink if there was a problem with their prototype. In the end, they reflected and communicated. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight a 2nd grader in particular who brainstormed various problems she noticed. You can see here she brainstormed problems like pollution in the ocean, coronavirus, and racism. This is from her digital journal on Seesaw, where students documented their research, their drawings, their tests and trials, and their reflection. Moving through just a sampling of her journal pages, you can see she collected information about the problem and later drew a prototype for the mask holder she wanted to build. She identified a problem that she and her family members had no place to put their mask when they returned home. So really looking at the interests of the student and trying to think, okay, what is a problem that you're facing, right? Next slide, please. Later, this student began making her first prototype for the mask holder, of course, adhering to all safety precautions. As students were in the building phase of the engineering design process, all students were given an opportunity to share their prototype in pairs and breakout rooms. We talked about what counts as effective feedback and co-constructed a chart to help guide them as they gave each other feedback. And you can see here that as the student got feedback from her peers through iterative revisions, she transformed the mask holder into a PPE station at the suggestion of one of her classmates. Now, it's important to note that all elementary students wanted to address societal challenges and design solutions to these challenges. And something that came out was that students really wanted to help others. And that was consistent with whatever problem and whatever prototype they developed. Not only were these students being persistent, sticking with a plan, designing it, improving it, fixing it, but they were learning about the engineering design process. Next slide. Students documented their learning, tests and trials in their digital journal since we were remote last year. There were both engineering and science learning outcomes. You can see here that the big ideas come out in the engineering learning outcomes. For example, in the first few bullets, we see that they ask questions, make observations, gather information about a situation that people want to change to define a simple problem that can be solved through the development of a new or improved object or tool. And the next two bullets outline what drawing and developing those prototypes looks like, and thinking about how the shape of an object helps its function as needed to solve a given problem. Now, as students ran tests and trials to test the strength, durability, and malleability of their structures, they realized that changes they make can generate observable patterns. For example, if I continuously adjust the length of an extendable belt for social distancing, which is actually another student's prototype, how does this influence the holder or the structure that was designed to hold the belt? Or in the student's example that we just saw, if I adjust the height of the mask holder and the weight of the base, how does that affect how many masks it can hold? These touch upon the cross-cutting concepts of cause and effect, structure and function, which is up here on the slides under the science learning outcomes. So by making science relevant to students and their interests, I certainly saw students were engaged and motivated to learn the engineering design process. Next slide, thank you.
All right, so Shiela described a second grade engineering unit, and now we are advancing to fifth grade science unit as the students are making sense of what happens to our garbage. So that's the question to explain the phenomenon of the garbage. Next slide. Now, as Tricia described, in traditional approaches, students are typically learn science, and if time permits, they may apply science to explain how that applies to the real world. Now, in the contemporary approaches, as you see, students are doing science and they are making sense of phenomena, and they use science, and as a product, they are learning science. Just a click. So you can see that as the students are making sense of phenomena, they learn all the sophisticated concepts. Now, over the course of instruction, as the students have figured out one phenomenon, that one answer to one question leads to the next one and next one. So students are working like the scientists. Now you can see on the top left, students sort the garbage into like food and non-food. You can see it in the two landfill bottles that we call affectionately. Students see what's happening to the properties of materials. Now let's go to that. What is that smell? Now I'm not going to ask you whether you can explain what is that smell or not, because you may have to compete with the fifth grade students, but students can explain with the particles. The last one is the decomposition. So students learn that microbes cause banana peels to decompose, but the plastic does not decompose. So the next click, over the course of instruction, you see that students are explaining what it means, and they explain what is the garbage, but they also realize that plastic pollution causes harm to the environment. Now, in this example, now some students speak English, but some other students may use another language. And even English learners, as they develop science understanding, their language becomes also sophisticated. So the next slide shows the evidence of English learners outcome. Now here you see the figure that shows the performance of 4 unit assessments over the course of the year. And you see non-ELs, non-English learners, former and current who are being served. There are two very important findings in this figure. One is that the former ELs in red perform just about comparably to non-ELs. Now, the more important finding is that the current L in the green bars, they started lower than the other two groups, but they perform comparably later in the year. So they catch up in learning science as well as learning English. That's the power of this approach of a phenomenon-based instruction with English learners and all the other students. Now we are implementing this year-long curriculum in New York City Department of Education for the next 2 years, and we would like to share the findings. The next click is that there are other large-scale studies that demonstrate the positive learning outcomes, and if you'd like to know, the outcomes are available. The next one. Now this time we are moving into middle school, and Shiela shared one lesson, and here working with NSTA, you see 3 lessons, and each lesson explains a phenomenon over the course of several lesson periods. The next slide is that by doing that, now you see that students are using data science. Students analyze the data from the Johns Hopkins University dashboard, and you see that as of today, we have over 5 million deaths globally. Students also can find information nationally and even in the district. Now, the second data show that the cumulative death by million people in the US is way higher than cumulative death in Canada. In Canada, the last one is that the CDC guideline shows about 3 times more Native Americans, Blacks, and Hispanics are dying. Students realize the ethnic and racial disparity of the deaths and cases and hospitalization, and students realize the injustice. The next slide is that they are using computer science to explain why and what would be the design. So here is the computer programming, and students realize that underlying causes cause the racial and ethnic disparities, like crowded housing or front-like work, like a Shiela student who would like to create a mask holder for the parents. It's the essential workers. And the students realize that if you live in crowded housing, you cannot simply keep 6 feet apart. If your parents are essential workers, they cannot stay at home. So they see the systemic issues here. The follow the science may not work. And by knowing the racial and ethnic disparities, the students design solutions to promote the system level solutions in society, which is advancement of the second grade students. And you can imagine, you can see these students advancing from the 2nd to 5th to middle school. The next is, thank you so much for the opportunity. Slide, that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you. Those were great, incredibly helpful. So as you all mentioned, I think Trish, you mentioned that, I think 45 states in DC are using the next generation science standards, or standards that, if they're not those in name, they're pretty much those in practice, right? So, and science instruction has really changed under those standards. I'm wondering if, we had some really good examples of what new NGSS science lessons look like. I'm wondering if one of you could talk a little bit about, under a more traditional science teaching, previous standards, what would a lesson on either climate change or pick a lesson on COVID-19 have looked like? And just to illustrate for reporters, just how big a difference there is. I don't know, Trish, if you wanna do that, or
Sure.
Shiela, if you, yeah, you can start.
Anybody
should feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe I was a middle school and high school teacher for over 2 decades in the state of Kentucky. So maybe I'll answer it with that hat on. And if Shiela wants to provide some commentary about elementary, especially in the high school classroom and then down into middle school, I think thinking back to our flip it slide, that I often presented information to kids, and then they did have an opportunity to investigate. We called it, hands-on learning, or they did a lab, and that was very affirming, like it was an affirmation lab that backed up what I had just presented. And at the end, or even as part of that lab, I might have discussed some phenomena in the real world where they could take that knowledge that I had presented to them and think about, okay, wow, so what I just learned could be used to explain this. And one of the things that happened a lot in that classroom, and I'm sure that you've seen depictions of this, is that the teacher would present a question, maybe a couple of kids would raise their hand, and they would give an answer that the teacher would affirm or push on and then move on to the next thing. So kids were sharing science facts, and they were often worried about, was their answer correct, and that with among their peers didn't necessarily want to volunteer. What if I'm wrong? The way that if you reposition phenomena to be what is driving the learning, and you reposition the role of the teacher not as the disseminator of information, but as providing an opportunity for kids to interact with that phenomenon and to have their own questions that are then driving the learning. A big aha moment for teachers that they'll often say at the beginning is, wow, I just need to flip the way I did things, reposition the phenomena first, maybe give them a chance to do the hands-on lab and really get in there and generate their own data. And then it's not that the teacher doesn't have knowledge and lead that learning through the discussions and the things that they're doing, but it's a repositioning of all of those things. So it really is driven by kids' questions that we can predict. And that's what we do in these lessons, is with a high degree of certainty. So teachers don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to stay up for 4 hours tonight trying to figure out what to do tomorrow to answer my kids' questions. It's really in that design. And the last thing I'll say is that kids are so empowered that what they're sharing is based on the evidence from and the data from interacting with the phenomena and engaging in those investigations earlier in the process, that they don't have to worry about sharing the right answer. It becomes more about sharing an evidence-based answer that they can put their reasoning around. And that is really empowering, and that leads to much deeper learning and engagement over time, and in science literacy they can take with them into adulthood that helps them function more fully in society. I'll pass it to Shiela.
No, Tricia, I feel like you answered that very thoroughly. And at my school, we're very lucky to also have a dedicated science teacher. I'm the STEM teacher. And, you know, I didn't see how the other teacher or even have experience with teaching science before this idea of phenomena-based instruction. And when I started designing this engineering design unit, I was really thinking about collaborating with my teacher colleagues and how important that is, because that type of collaboration, they do a lot, the teachers at my school do a lot of work around social issues and climate change and issues that students are really passionate about, and they're doing research about all these different ideas that they're wondering about. And because we have that collaboration with the classroom teachers, I'm able to bring that into my STEM classroom. And then, like you said, they can do more research, they can do tests and trials around what they want to get out of it. So yes, so yeah.
That's great.
Liana, could I address that from a different perspective? So I have been in, just like a Trish, longer than Shiela. I've been in the education profession for a couple of decades. I was one who developed a very prominent curriculum unit before the science standards and after the science standards. So I was one of those people who had to flip myself. When people said, I like your work, I had to say, you mean before 2010 or after 2010? That was that much of a difference. So before, when we developed a curriculum that was used for thousands of students and hundreds of teachers, it was, these are the science concepts. What investigations and experiments do we need to teach these concepts? And if time permits, apply those concepts. But if time do not permit, then just skip, just can't teach the concept. This time, it is, all right, these are the core ideas in the science disciplines. But what are the phenomena that students would find most compelled to figure out? So it starts from the students. What would they care about to do? So not only that, I have been working with the teachers and leadership, but I also have been working with the undergraduate students at NYU, say, come up with a phenomena. And these are just phenomenal phenomena that I would say, wow. So the power is not only the teachers, the students, but also the future teachers who really get it.
I love that. That's great. I was looking through some of my old stories when I was writing about the NGSS when states were adopting it, and I had a quote from Brian Reiser, who helped write the standards, and he had said, the NGSS does not ask you to explain photosynthesis, the NGSS asks you to explain how a tree gets all its stuff. And I thought that kind of like really encapsulated everything you all were saying. That's great. Okhee, I have a question for you. And you also had a hand in writing the standards, I believe. So what does the research say about how students learn science? So we know that the Next Gen Science Standards are based on research, but what does that research say about how kids learn science? And I'm sure we can kind of think about all the things we've learned and see it, a thread in there.
When the framework came out, it was based on the research on core ideas, the students doing practices and cross-cutting concepts. By the way, cross-cutting concepts are unique in science that we don't have in Common Core. I have to point that out. And then students build an understanding to around the core ideas. But what is most important when we talk about equity is that students are doing science as scientists and engineers as having the agency. That students are not learning science that is given to them. Do you see who is the master? Students are the master who wanted to drive the science instruction. That is the fundamental. So developing the and I
Oh, I think.
The
you're kind of going in and out a little bit, Okhee. Are other people having a little trouble?
2013 was when the framework came out and the NGSS came out. And that was when the census showed that it flipped, that the traditional minorities became the majority. And it was a perfect timing of the new standards. And the student demographics were the students in charge of doing science. So NGSS made sure, and also the framework, that diversity and equity should be baked in as essential and core, not as an afterthought. And that's why it is such an important topic. And when we say about students doing science, meaning all students are doing science, including English learners, the students with disabilities. Students are doing science to figure out the phenomena. And this is what the power of Sheila's did. Sheila had that many students asking questions about racism, COVID-19, climate change, and Sheila could have said, oh, these are too big for second grade students. I don't know what to do, or this could be. But Sheila said, I trust you, I let you drive the instruction, and that's what we got of the outcomes. So the phenomena, when you think about students are coming with the phenomena and drive the instruction, that opens up like a COVID-19, climate change, food sustainability, pollution. It opens up the societal challenges for students.
So really putting students in the driver's seat is what I hear you saying. I hope that people who are on this webinar are thinking of questions. We're going to turn to you pretty soon to ask your own questions. I do want to make sure to get to this question though. I'm wondering how can reporters find out about the great work that science teachers are doing? Do you have ideas for reporters how they can find stories on teachers doing great lessons like the ones you've shared? Trish or Sheila, jump in.
Trish, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. So two things I think have bubbled up for me out of our conversation so far. Obviously, the phenomena piece, and the one thing that I can say, like we've talked a lot about global phenomena and universal phenomena like garbage. People that's something that people can relate to, and kids all over can relate to. But there's incredible power in local phenomena. So I think giving teachers in schools opportunity to share how they're leveraging the local phenomena in their communities in the science classroom can be really powerful, and really powerful for the whole community, because it really it brings all the stakeholders together. And we've talked a lot throughout this first 30 minutes about impact, that kids need to feel that they have an impact on the world, and phenomena is a way to get there, and that's a way that they can directly impact their community. So I think asking teachers and in schools that question is important. And then the other piece that we haven't called out explicitly that I think is a really big change is that teachers often ask for support around is if you're going to have a classroom that is truly a community and everybody is positioned as knower, teachers need the skills, the strategies to surface ideas and probe like that beautiful thinking that kids have to help them get it from in their brains to out in either what they say or what they draw and the models that Okhee showed. And so that asking teachers in classrooms how their kids are sharing their ideas can really be a powerful piece as well, because that shows the community what's happening, and it gives them a little insight into what's different in that, you know, the magic that's going on in schools, because it is very different from the way that most parents have experienced school and what they would use as a touchstone. And I think it really does a lot to enhance that school home relationship for the stakeholders in the community to feel like they understand what's going on in schools and can appreciate how the research has created these new opportunities for kids that we hope will ultimately prepare them in society where they can make great civics decisions and medical decisions from their family and be able to leverage data in ways that that maybe adults, especially from what adults are sharing around COVID, that, you know, it's been a struggle. We're bombarded with all of this data and we didn't all have those experiences as students where it's been easy for us to make sense of. And so I think positioning that for parents and the stakeholders it might really be a great angle. And I'll pass it to Okhee or Shiela.
Thank you, Trish. And I would just add that finding out if this type of instruction is going on in your local community, one way to look is to not just go to certain schools and, you know, talk to some of the teachers, but also to look at conferences. Because I feel like as a teacher, I get a lot of great ideas from going to conferences, and you might see a trend. At the conferences, what workshops are being given, who are the presenters, who are some of the attendees that were like, hey, let's collaborate on this idea that you had around this, whether it's engineering design or a science concept. I feel like checking out those either local or national education conferences might be a good place to start, and also your local, like Tricia was saying, your local school, if that helps.
So
Yeah.
I would like to add a couple of points. One is what to expect in classrooms. Science standards were not associated with any federal initiative, but these were grassroots movements coming from the states and the practitioners. And up to this point, Trish said that 45 states adopted, and 3 more are coming. Now, how many states do we have in the nation? 50, and when you count the 45 and the 3 more, that's about what? The entire nation has been adopting the science standards and adapting. So that's one. These are not just standards that just about all this. So what we expect? They expect that we would like to see this phenomenon-based instruction, because that's what most of the states adopted, given. The second is that the students, the teachers also have a lot of autonomy, because they can choose the local phenomena that are relevant to me and to the local community. And Tricia told me from the NSTA that one topic that became really popular and prominent is local phenomena. Tricia, remember that? And that became really prominent during the remote instruction, because the parents became part of teachers. So what do we do the science instruction around the local home, community, and family? So it surrounds all of those issues.
That's great. I see Eric has popped back on the screen, which tells me it's time for Q&A with the audience.
Yes, so yeah, we can take questions from the audience. Please type your question into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel, plus your name and affiliation. I actually have a question, which is, I'll start with you, Trish. If others want to chime in, As you probably know, both climate change and COVID-19, can be polarizing issues. And they can, feel politically loaded at times in communities. I'm wondering what, if anything, you're hearing from your members around the country about how they navigate that, whether they get feedback, positive or negative, when they try to, build these, important issues into the curriculum. How do they navigate that?
Absolutely, great question. And that goes all the way back to when I was in the classroom for decades. I would regularly, at least once a year, get calls from reporters surfacing the same thing, not always about climate change, but other, I guess you would say, hot button topics in science. And I'd be very interested to see what she would add or take away from this statement. But one of the things that we saw a lot of discussion around was at the initial adoption of standards, either at the state or when people were considering adopting the national standards. And that's been ongoing for 10 years. Like we said, 3 states are just about to, and they've reworked or wordsmithed or changed some of the language, especially around climate science in those standards that is set the policy. But when it comes to the practitioner part, one of the things that this new vision really opens up the door and makes, I think, this tension a little bit easier to navigate is that in the examples I shared, if you peruse those examples, they're really grounded in data sets, and it's positioning kids to argue from evidence around those data sets, as opposed to, again, the teacher being the sage on the stage that says, these are the science facts, this is what you need to believe. But instead, we're putting real world phenomena and data sets in front of kids. And through that organic evidence-based discourse, that the classroom community is developing a deep understanding of these science ideas that are core and critical to the field of science. And that often feels very different to stakeholders and to those that sometimes have questions and concerns about the facts of science, that the process is more organic, and often classrooms will come away with some unsettledness to that, and that's okay. But the opportunity to grapple with that data and to think about how that explains what we're seeing in the world is what gets them to that deep understanding of the core ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Tricia, if I could just add on to what Tricia was saying, as a classroom teacher, one thing I noticed was some of the students also vocalized, people are not wearing masks, people are not social distancing in our community. And we had a discussion around that. Why is that? And with my 4th graders, we actually ended up looking at a simulator from the Washington Post about what happens when people stay at home, when we actually quarantine, what happens when we socially distance. And we looked at the simulator they had that looked at some of the data. And like Trish said, you really bring it back down to the science when you're in the classroom and navigating those tricky conversations, like you're saying, Eric, when that comes up. Grounding it in the science is very important.
Is it hard with something like COVID because it's so new? There probably aren't a whole lot of curriculum materials and stuff out there. I mean, you can quickly go on the internet and probably find something on Pinterest or whatever.
Yeah,
but maybe there's also a little bit of caution that teachers feel about how to introduce something when it's not an issue like climate change. At least it's been around, as you say, for quite a while now, so there's probably all kinds of good resources out there.
Yeah, something I had to do was our school when we were remote last year, and also even this year, we've been using Get Epic or Epic, which is a digital library, and they had actually several titles around COVID, and to find Lexile texts that were at grade level for certain students to be able to read and engage with was challenging. But like we had to do some digging, but there are some resources out there, but it's still new, like you're saying.
Responding to Eric, your questions together. So when the framework came out, it started in 2010, published in 2012, and the standards, NGSS, were published in 2013. So we're talking about a decade ago. Wow, time flies. Okay. I remember those days when the decision was evolution is in unequivocally. A decade ago, it was a political issue. Climate change is in unequivocally. Engineering solutions to problems are equally important as explaining the phenomena. And then we also have information transfer, that sound energy are not just energy, but it is information transfer. Not twice to say, I love you, 3 times, no, I don't like you. That's information transfer as a digital. Then on top of that, we had diversity and equity as a part of. So it has a lot of things in it. Knowing that states might not adopt standards for whatever reason of evolution, climate change, or equity and diversity. But with a foresight, because it was the right thing to do in the standards that they are in. And I'm so glad that we included all of them because they are science. Years later, because all the right, what represent the science, including diversity and equity, that has the staying power. After 10 years, it will still go. So by saying phenomena matter, that opens up societal challenges. And I'm thinking that it used to be, Liana, you asked the question about what was the science instruction like? Students learn the science because it's a body of knowledge. And then NGSS provide that students make sense of phenomena and design solutions. And when you design solutions and make sense of phenomena, then the phenomena could be societal challenges. And right now, what? COVID-19, climate change, and it just opens up. So in terms of the resources, we don't have as much because COVID-19 is new, but we have emerging resources to respond to the field. One personal example is that I was looking into COVID-19 as a societal challenge, and I am very delighted and humbled that since July 2020, you can see my little bit of, I think I have accepted at least 25 talks by educators saying this is really important and we need to address this topic as entry along with the climate change, and it will be health. And when you think about the Build Back Better, 3 priorities include COVID and climate change and health, along with the social justice and immigration that go into economy. And so this is a policy where science is at the core. I was a bit hesitant of saying it, but since you asked those 2 questions of political and societal challenges, I say it.
Thanks, Okhee. And I'll just add real quick one other big difference from when I was early in the classroom is that several corporations, foundations have stepped up and funded the development of resources that are free to everyone. So even in that, like thinking about equity and thinking about underserved and under-resourced communities. And so I can point to the Open SciEd initiative where funding created this middle school curriculum that is phenomena based, and they also have put out supplemental curriculum that is specific to COVID and it was very timely. But those materials are free to every teacher all over the country, all over the world, so that districts and schools don't need to spend their money investing in the materials, but they can invest in providing the resources for the classroom learning and the training for teachers to be able to enact them, which is a really beautiful thing, thinking about equity in a little bit different way. And this others like the Smithsonian and a lot of the work that we're able to do right now at NSTA that we can turn around very quickly, or the lessons and the sequences of lessons that are being funded by a lot of corporations that see the need in science education, and they just want to be part of the solution to that problem. So that is really a beautiful thing as well.
Thank you. We do have a question about where reading and writing enter into science instruction, you know, really kind of multidisciplinary. Just for purposes of time, though, I'm going to ask if just one of you could respond to that, and then we've got there's a few other questions too. Who wants to grab that one?
I can go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Okhee. Go ahead, Okhee.
Yeah, if you go, Okhee, then I have a question for Shiela too. So
all right, that's equity and justice. All right. So when Tricia said it, traditionally and contemporary, traditionally what was done is that here is a body of knowledge defined by scientists and engineers. And this is something that students must know. Does it make sense? I don't know, but why are you doing it? Because I must do, because I'm expected to do. Typically that body of knowledge or canonical knowledge is written in textbooks. And that's why reading and writing was so prominent, that we read and write about science. This time, as Brian Reiser will say, okay, what do we do? What is the problem and what is the phenomenon that you wanted to figure out? Now, when you have a phenomenon, what would be the question that you wanted to ask? And how do we design? What is your initial idea to develop a model? And then design and collect and argue and explain. And then we say, let's find out more information from books, from reading and writing or web. So reading and writing are really important, but reading and writing do not drive science instruction. What is really prominent is that when students have ideas, they are very compelled to communicate their ideas in very precise and sophisticated ways. So as a science understanding develops, they wanted to communicate and they wanted to say, give an example. So like particles. Particles and molecules are typically introduced. You have to know particles, you have to know molecules and atoms to explain. No, what it is the students do the experimentation and they say, oh, those are tiny little things that are too small to see. Those are tiny little things that are too small to see. And students will say, how do you call them? Particles. All right, we agree on particles. So they have an understanding first and particles. And then they understand better. So it's a flip. Eric, if anything, we work with the reading and writing. But reading and writing do not guide the science instruction. It's a phenomena and problems that guide instruction.
Okay, thank you. Shiela, for you, this is a question that's not directly about all of what you're exactly discussing today, but I'm just curious, and others might be, is it unusual to have a STEM teacher, number one, and in an elementary school? You know, is that an increasingly common role that, you know, a reporter could kind of, you know, local community might find out, huh, this is sort of a relatively new concept, or maybe I'm wrong.
No, great question. So I've actually found a community of STEM teachers on different social media kind of groups, and we are here, we are in schools, STEM teachers, and I actually typically it's kind of known as a technology teacher in some schools, and because most schools do have a dedicated science teacher like our school does, but there's also a technology teacher, and so sometimes the technology teacher doesn't want to just do technology, they do more like STEM, like science, technology, engineering, math, computer science. So because I wanted to round out all of those different areas, I said, let me do STEM instead of just a technology teacher that was previously my role at my school, or the previous role. I wasn't necessarily the technology teacher yet. I became the STEM teacher because I thought that was a more relevant title to encompass all those different areas. And it is, you will find that a lot of teachers have rebranded technology to STEM. So yes, you can find that in your local schools, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Liana, I have a couple more questions, but I want to give the mic back to you. Do you have any other questions that you want to ask?
Well, I just have one question. Shiela, I loved the example of your student who made the mask holder. It was a problem in our house too until we had to solve that. And I wish she could have come over early in the pandemic and helped us out. I'm just wondering if you have any other examples of really cool problem solving that kids have.
I didn't want to bring it up because I didn't know how much time we had, but one of my if it's COVID related, we had a majority of our students choose COVID, especially last year during the remote learning. And one of my students made, I think I mentioned a little bit, the extendable belt for social distancing for 6 feet. That was 4th grader. She made a whole Padlet about like an online, it's like an online website basically that explains how it works. I also had another student who was a 4th grader. He did a COVID mood meter that he coded in Python. So as you can see, I let them express their prototypes in different ways, which was challenging as a teacher. But he made a COVID mood meter for students that are feeling lonely and they can check in with their emotions. And he coded that in Python, and it alerts the students' caregiver how they're feeling if they're feeling lonely. So that I was very impressed by those projects, and there were others that also really liked the PPE station later on, and they made it like a whole section in their house. So it just really impressed with how engaged the students were in interacting with this new phenomenon that that we're all in. So and I just want to add one more thing, because to the literacy bit, the reading and writing, we did a lot of, eventually I want to integrate into my unit persuasive writing, right? So that once they are realizing there's this data they've been gathering, writing informational writing around the science of what they're building, to later then talk to larger stakeholders, like companies that may want to know more about what the student is building. And that can be a persuasive writing unit that the teacher can collaborate with the STEM teacher on as well.
I would like to expand that reading and writing one step further. So when you think about English language learners or students with reading comprehension difficulties, we automatically say that Okhee, who is from Korea, she doesn't speak English, and you define me as a deficit that I don't. So you gave me vocabulary. That was the approach, because you don't have it, and so I give you the reading first. The approach is that you may not know that I have great ideas. You may not even know that I could be really smart. So instead of saying I am limited with the reading and writing, show me what you got. So multiple languages, multi-modality, it's not reading and writing. I can explain things by using basura and the drawings of smell and particles. So that's another approach of do not use reading and writing as pre or front, but it's as a product, just like a science product.
Thank you. I'm afraid that we have run out of time, so I need to close this out now. I would like to thank our guests so much today. Liana Loewus of Education Week, Okhee Lee of New York University, Shiela Lee of PS59 in New York City, and Tricia Shelton of the National Science Teaching Association. Thank you all. Finally, I want to thank today's attendees and EWA members for joining us. As soon as the webinar closes, you will see an evaluation survey. Please complete it. Again, your feedback is important to us and helps us improve. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.